Hello, everybody. I am Donal Murphy, and welcome to my podcast. In this episode, I speak with a human resources expert about the complexities of layoffs, the emotional impact on employees, and the importance of reframing unemployment as an opportunity for growth. We discuss strategies for job seekers, including the significance of networking, authenticity in interviews, finding the right fit, and the role of AI in the job search process. My guest today is Becky Jones, who is a senior human resources consultant for Swift HR Solutions. She has spent her career as a human resources leader, supporting innovative companies from startup stage to maturity. At Swift, Becky supports clients in a variety of industries, including technology, nonprofit, professional services, and financial services. She partners with client leadership to develop HR practices that are both stage appropriate and aligned with the organization's culture, mission, and goals. Her strengths include employee relations, benefits, and performance management. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Well, welcome, Becky, to my podcast, Layoffs Over Lattes, and I'm delighted to have you here, and thanks for joining and adding your expertise to the conversations around layoffs and unemployment. Before we get going, as I say ahead of every single episode, I do want to acknowledge that layoffs are hard and the subsequent period of unemployment is hard. I am going through that currently myself. It can be mentally challenging, emotionally challenging. But I do want to emphasize that this podcast is being produced for educational and entertainment purposes only. It does not substitute for seeking the care and guidance of a trained professional, be that a licensed therapist, a medical doctor, or any other trained professional who can help you get through the challenges of unemployment. So please seek the care that you need. So, Becky, again, thanks for being here. And the first question that I launch every conversation with is my curiosity around what you as a child wanted to be when you grew up and whether or not it's different from how you've dedicated your career.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And I'm really excited to just share my thoughts with this group of people. So for me, I was a bookish kid. I loved to read and I loved school. So for me, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher. So growing up, my mom was an elementary school teacher. And so when I was in elementary school, I thought, oh, I'd love to be an elementary school teacher. Then I got to junior high and you had specialties. And I loved my English teachers in junior high. I thought, ooh, I want to be a junior high English teacher. Then I got to high school and I said, oh my gosh, this would be even better. You read better books. So when I got to high school, I thought I want to be a high school English teacher. And then I got to college and I was an English literature major in college and I had a secondary major in French. And I thought, oh my gosh, my dream would be to become a college professor, to teach English literature at the college level. And then I started looking at PhD programs and taking the GRE. And I kind of hit a wall at the end of college and thought, oh my gosh, do I want to do another like 6 years of school? Do I want to write a dissertation? I'm not sure about that. So I took a pause and explored what else was out there in the world and realized that I could use a lot of the skills that I think would make me a great teacher in other parts of other ways of work. And so for me, I use, I think, a lot of the things that would have made me a great teacher in HR. And I teach and coach and support employees and executives in my job. And I had no idea this job really existed when I was in college. And so I kind of fell into it over time. But I think we often are drawn to what we know. So that was kind of where I started.
Okay. Well, I'm very excited to take advantage of your expertise in human resources and the career that you've had. And so, to start out, can you walk us through what happens behind the scenes as a company is contemplating a round of layoffs?
Sure. And just to be clear, my experience is more on the small company side. So I
Okay.
have spent my career as an HR director in smaller companies and then as a consultant partnering with smaller companies. So most of my experience has been in the, 10 to 300 size companies that I've worked with over the years. And so I think when you get to the Microsofts and Amazons of the world, they have a very different approach to how they think about layoffs. And that is not my expertise. But in working with small businesses, I think there's obviously, it's such a complex situation. And I will say from my experience, none of the companies I've ever worked with that have done layoffs have taken it lightly, have treated it as an easy solution, have treated it as something that, is done in a flippant way. When companies make the choice to do layoffs, they do a lot of soul searching. Look at, you know, where has our business changed? How have roles changed over time? How has our needs changed as a company because of growth, because of shrinkage, because of changes in the market? And so they initially go looking for places where maybe there's too much effort in one department or too many staff in one department that maybe they need to pull back the balance of staffing in a particular department compared with the rest of the company. So maybe I see this actually a lot in HR departments where they've got a recruiting department because they were scaling as a startup. And then suddenly the market has shifted and they're not growing as much. And so they look at the HR department and say, well, gosh, we had all these people that we hired to help with recruiting and help with onboarding and all the administration related to the hiring we were doing. And now we have to shift because we don't have those needs anymore. And that happens in many departments. It could be that engineering is pulling back because they're not doing intensive product development anymore. And so organizations look at, where do we have extra people that are not essential to the operation of the company? Many times that has nothing to do with the people themselves. And it's really more about, what are the business needs? That being said, there's certainly times when companies use this as an opportunity to move out low performers. So that's certainly part of the equation in some cases. My husband used to work for Cisco, and as a manager, he had a large team he worked with, and they would just basically force them to force rank all their employees during the performance review process, and they get rid of the bottom 5% every time. And that was tough, right? That was hard because for him, he didn't always have someone who would fall into that bottom 5% category. And he would argue with his management saying like, I don't have anyone I want to get rid of, but from their perspective, there's always low hanging fruit. There's always people that aren't meeting expectations. And when you're in a big company, again, I don't have a ton of experience with that, but what I found is that sometimes there's forced rankings. There's situations where people fall into that category where they don't even belong there, but they get kind of caught up in that desire to purge the lower end of the company. And that's really unfortunate, I think.
Right.
So, as you look at it from the other side, it's so hard to know. And I remember my husband actually had an experience while he was at Cisco where there was an acquisition and there was a big reorganization that happened. And during that process, he was shifted to another role. And he was very disappointed about that. He lost a role that he really loved and working for a manager that he really loved. And it really kind of broke the relationship he had with that manager. And, he wasn't reporting to that person anymore. They lost touch. 10, 15 years later, after that manager retired, they got back in touch. We had lunch with that manager. And he actually said, just so you know, they were trying to lay you off during that process. And I went to bat for you. I made the case that, I thought you were a real value to the organization, and I encouraged them to move you into this role because the alternative was that you weren't going to be there. And he never got that story. And I think for me as an HR professional, I heard that conversation, and my husband had been really hurt by that decision, but he didn't know what all went into it. He didn't know what went on behind the scenes. And it actually repaired that relationship with his old manager once they had the opportunity to have a real conversation about what happened. And so I would say you never know what's going on behind the scenes. And so to try to project your own idea about why this is happening, who's done what, it's not really productive. And so I would say just know that many times there are things behind the scenes happening that you will never know about. And there are decisions being made that might be fair, that might not. And ultimately focusing on that and dwelling on that isn't going to be the most helpful way to think about your transition.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful conclusion, although it took many years for that to happen. But what a wonderful conclusion in terms of your husband's career story. That's great to hear. Um, are there other options that you think leaders of companies should consider when looking at ways to cut costs that don't require a reduction in force? And is that even a
Ab-
possibility sometimes?
Absolutely. I think we saw that a lot during COVID, where companies had to get really creative. And so I worked with a lot of small businesses that found other ways to save money in those days where businesses were just really struggling to try to stay afloat. We saw companies who offered the opportunity for their employees to do a voluntary reduction in hours. So
Hmm.
that's an approach companies can take to say, hey, we're struggling. We're trying to figure out how to navigate this next phase of our company. If anyone wants to go to 3/4 time, we'll keep you on benefits, but we will, we're looking for folks to reduce their hours. So I think companies can do that. You can also look at things like bonuses and compensation increases. So one of the things I've seen companies try to navigate as they make these decisions is they need to cut money from their budget. And so they have to figure out, is it going to be more effective for us to reduce the number of people on the team, keep what we think is the core group of people that we have to make our business work, and reward those people so that we can retain them? Or do we make the decision to kind of implement austerity measures for the whole company, keep all the people, but then maybe not give bonuses, not give salary increases, kind of change that equation? And what they risk at that moment is losing some of their top performers to competitors who can pay more. And so it's a tough decision. And I think companies have to look at the marketplace, look at the situation they're in, and decide, what is the bigger risk for them? Is it having a smaller team, or is it losing their best people by not rewarding them?
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly the decisions that have to come into play are very nuanced. Again, for speaking for myself as somebody that was laid off, all I encountered was we have to reduce costs. Sorry that we have to lay you off, and onwards we go. But to hear the things that could have happened, or things that were contemplated behind the scenes is somewhat reassuring that
Sure.
companies are not taking this lightly.
Absolutely.
Um, Many people are deeply impacted by a layoff. It can be very traumatic. There's the loss of identity from
Mhm.
losing a job. There's a loss of a job that provided financial security to oneself or one's family. The loss of a job that you loved. Even the loss of the day to day working relationships that you had kind of strengthened and cultivated even over years. How do you think someone could reframe a layoff to move with energy and purpose into their job search?
Sure. Well, I can actually speak from my own experience. I had been working for a startup in the kind of late 2000s. I'd been there for about 7 years. I had scaled the company pretty rapidly, hired a fairly large team under me, and worked with them to kind of create a role that they'd never had before, that I was able to move into because I wanted growth opportunities. I wanted to take on new responsibilities. And unfortunately, as the company hit some hiccups and had to shrink, because I'd kind of advocated for creating this new role for myself, I kind of worked myself out of a job because I had a team that was doing what I had been doing. And I was more expensive and I was kind of extra. I was doing special projects and working on things that I was really passionate about, but it wasn't a role that was essential to the operations of the company. And so I ultimately got laid off after 7 years and really helping to build that company. And that was really rough for me. I love that company. It was my first real, leadership job in a company. And I was so heartbroken when my role got eliminated. And the CEO told me, look, you're leaving on great terms. It's a financial decision. This is not about your performance. And he said all the things that I needed to hear, but it still didn't make it feel any less impactful because I had bought a house a couple years earlier. I had a mortgage. I had a safety net. I had family that could support me, but it was scary because I was a single person. I had a mortgage to pay. I had to, pay for my benefits. And I'd never been in that position before. And so for me, I definitely went through some really rough, just time questioning. What do I want to do next? How am I going to navigate this transition? And for me, I had to kind of take a step back and recognize that this was an opportunity. I had built a career in a place from being fairly junior, coming in and learning a lot on the job. And during that 7 year period, I was, I grew a lot, I learned a lot, but the people I worked with had seen me experience that growth. They remembered me from when I was pretty green, a new manager. And so as I moved into my next role that I eventually got within a few months, um, I was shocked by my experience at that new company because I was a senior director of HR. I moved into a great role that was a growth opportunity for me that allowed me to take on new responsibility. And I couldn't believe how differently people viewed me because I came
Mm,
in as an expert.
mm,
I was farther along in my career. I had learned a lot. And it hit me that there's such a benefit to kind of restarting your work experience once you've gained more experience. And so for me that was actually a great opportunity, and every time I've kind of transitioned in my career I've recognized that I gain kind of
mhm,
clout and credibility, and I'm viewed in a different way because I'm coming in with more experience and more expertise. And
mhm,
so I viewed that transition as something that broke me out of a place where I was kind of, I was viewed with less credibility to a place where I came in with a lot more validity to what I said in terms of how the team listened to me and respected me. And so for me, it was an opportunity to kind of have a reset point in my career where I was in a comfort zone at that company that I loved, and I wouldn't have left on my own probably, even though for my career, I think it would have been more effective for me to move on sooner. I kept trying to find opportunities to stay. So I created these new roles for myself. I convinced the leadership that I could take on more because I wanted to grow my career there. And I think for many people, we get in our comfort zone and we want to stay where we are because we know the people, we care about the team we work with. But the most successful people financially, studies have shown, are the people who change jobs regularly. And it's because they reset their salary, they come in at the new market rate, they're not trying to keep up with the market within a company, especially as our market has just wildly shifted over the last 20 years or so in terms of base compensation. And so when we have an opportunity to kind of take that step into a new company, there's many times chances to really get a lot of benefit and to reset compensation, to reset expectations. It can feel like you're coming from a position of weakness because you've left your other job. But ultimately, especially in this economy, in the past, at other times, I might have viewed people getting laid off as a question mark because, if there's not a lot of layoffs happening, sometimes
right.
there is that perception that the people who get laid off are the less valuable people. I think in this economy, that's not the case. Everyone knows what's happening. Everyone sees what's happening. I'm in Seattle, and the Seattle tech market is wild right now. And in the companies that I'm working with, we don't view people who get laid off as having a liability. We just say, oh gosh, that's really rough. It's the market's weird. Who are great are getting laid off. We look at references, we look at other things to validate that. But at the same time, I don't think you're coming in with a chip on your shoulder that you're not worthy. And so it can be an opportunity to reposition yourself and come in, to an opportunity to grow.
Yeah. And I will echo what you said, is that I would certainly have preferred to have left on my own terms. But similarly, I was at the job that I was laid off from. I was probably at that company maybe a year or even 2 years too long.
Yeah.
And I don't think I had
Mm.
the language or the framework to understand how do I move myself out. And I was there for almost a decade. I was very well regarded. I think I was well regarded because when you said they sometimes lay off the worst performers, I'm like, I thought I was laid off because I was a top earner, but maybe not. I think in the great scheme of things, I am now kind of reframing my own layoff as an opportunity to reset. And I think the company, in the great scheme of things, did me a favor by kicking me out because I I was dragging my feet on leaving anyway. So again, would have preferred to have left on my own terms, but here we are, and here's an opportunity for me to look at my career in a different light and from
Right.
different angles.
Sure.
Moving on, and kind of maybe piggybacking what you said about the people who earn the most move on the most. But what qualities do you see in people who navigate these types of career transitions successfully?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, letting go of the blame game and bitterness and
Hmm.
embracing job search with kind of openness and seeing it as an opportunity. You can tell when you're doing an interview for someone and you ask, like, why did you leave your last job? If that person is stuck in that kind of blaming and bitterness, it comes out in the conversation. It comes out in other questions too. You can tell when someone is angry and bitter and frustrated, and it does not read well in an interview process. Nobody wants to work with someone who holds on to bitterness, who holds on to blame. And so I would say trying to work through those emotions personally will help you put your best foot forward in the interview process as you're looking for your next opportunity. And so that's easier said than done. As I said, when I got laid off, it was very hard for me and it took me a while to work through that. But I really tried to position myself to take advantage of the opportunity and to be excited about the next steps. And for me, that meant um, creating a narrative that I could share with people about why I was excited about my opportunity. Kind of similar to what you said now. It was, you were ready for a change, it was time. And sometimes you have to kind of sell yourself that perspective. It's not going to be innately there, but try to think about, what's your elevator pitch about why this is a great time for you to be looking for a job? What's your elevator pitch about why you're really excited about exploring a new opportunity? Make sure you take the time to really think through and but embrace and believe what you're saying. Because when you have that kind of positive mentality, when you're focused on you know why this is a good thing for you, you come across as so much more confident and professional, and you come across as someone that they want to work with. So make sure that you really think about, and ask people for help as you're talking about these things, talking with your friends, talking with your family. Think through, ask them, do I feel authentic when I'm talking about this? Have them help you process and help you think about why this is a good opportunity for you. You don't have to come up with this on your own. One of the best things that I would say I've done in my career is rely on mentors, rely on people in my life, both professional contacts and personal contacts that I respect and trust, and have those people help me navigate these situations. Ask for feedback, ask for coaching, listen to podcasts like this, look for ways to kind of train your brain to think about the process differently, because it comes across so clearly in the interview process when people are broken by it. And nobody wants to hire a broken person. You have to have that positive attitude.
Yeah, and just going back to that, and in an effort to try to negate that bitterness and that sense of chip on the shoulder that an interviewer may be encountering. And when you said that your layoff you took very, very hard, were you mindful and conscious of the fact that you needed to spend some time just processing before launching into actually finding a job? And
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah, I mean, they were very kind. They gave me 6 weeks of notice, and allowed me to kind of wrap up the work I was doing. And honestly, I was not looking for jobs during that time. I was really, my main focus during that 6 weeks was just wrapping up everything as positively as I could. I was very committed to this company, and they knew it, and they were willing to give me that time. I know not everyone gets that opportunity, so I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to really wrap up my work in a meaningful way. And for me, I just focus very heavily on closing out my work effectively and being able to do that. Um, and if you don't have the opportunity to do that, I encourage you to take a little bit of time. Hopefully, you have some severance, you have a little bit of cushion. Ultimately, a week or two is not going to make or break, your job search. And so, take the time you need to get yourself into a better place. read books, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube, find things that help you change your thinking, that allow you to really refocus. Take it as an opportunity also to think about what you want. I had to really think about what I wanted and where I wanted to go next. And when I was looking for jobs, I applied to a lot of different kinds of jobs in different kinds of industries because I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go next. But I really tried to refocus on things that I was excited about and that I wanted to grow in and that I saw as an opportunity for me to take the next step in my career. And it took me a while to figure out what those things were. And so I would just encourage people to really pause, take time, talk to people, and don't start that job search until you really are ready to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. And you had mentioned, mentors, podcasts, books, taking the time. Are there any other types of support that you think job seekers should lean into following a layoff?
Sure. Well, one of the things I've noticed as I've personally been involved in layoffs is that a lot of companies will offer some sort of outplacement service, and a lot of people don't take advantage of it. And I'm always shocked by that because we're willing to pay for a service to help them, professional people whose entire job is helping people transition. And if you're offered that by your company, take advantage of it. They're paying the fee, you're not. And you never know what you'll get out of that opportunity. And so I would say, look at all the resources the company is willing to offer you. You could even ask for outplacement support if you feel like it would be helpful for you as part of your severance negotiation. So that's definitely one thing I feel like people don't take advantage of that they should. And if you don't have that opportunity, there are services you can pay for that aren't that expensive that can help you reevaluate your path. And I think I wish I had done that, because I was at the stage where I I just wasn't sure where I wanted to go, and I didn't realize there were resources out there. My company didn't offer me outplacement, and I know people who provide those kinds of services, who do career coaching. There's life coaches, there's career coaches, there's all different resources out there that don't have to be that expensive. You don't have to do hours and hours and hours of coaching, but spending a few hours with a resume review, working with a coach to kind of help you think about that, talking about how you want to grow your career, where you want to go, what your next step should be. It can really be a clarifying moment, especially if you don't have folks in your life who understand your particular industry or your career path in a meaningful way. Talking with a professional who might be more attuned to your industry can be helpful. So those are things that I would encourage people to consider if you feel like you can invest in that.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things I just wanted to bring up and maybe get your take on, you talked about outplacement services that companies sometimes make available to the employees that they're laying off. But I have also thought about, could companies go a little further? You talked about books, podcasts, other resources, and maybe companies feel like, you know what, we're just laying these people off, and maybe it would just be just another kind of kick in the teeth for us to say, oh, and by the way, read this book and listen to that podcast. So maybe they want to stay away from that. But I've often felt like companies could go even a little further in saying, okay, here's an outplacement service, but here are the New York Times bestseller list for people who are in transition. Maybe you read those. Here are podcasts that people are listening to in terms of human development focused conversations. So again, when I look back on me being laid off, would I have thought, okay, you're laying me off and now you're telling me how to navigate this? But with the passage of time, I'm thinking, maybe companies could even push themselves a little forward to offer even more resources and kind of send people on their way in a kinder way. So
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of, and again, maybe we've touched upon it and kind of asking, the question in different ways, but, any tools or practices that people could use to make the job search more effective? in your mind? And again, looking back on when you were laid off, was there anything else that you maybe even practiced on a daily basis in terms of your routine that was helpful?
Sure. Well, to be honest, the most important thing I've ever done in my job search is use my network. And I know people hear it all the time. But as I look back, my last three jobs that I've had, which is basically all of my jobs since I got laid off, have been opportunities that I found through my network and not just cold applied to. Um, and it it's so powerful to use your professional connections and also personal connections if they're relevant, to get a door open. And I have not been afraid to do that, and I think it's really helped me grow in my career. So the job that I ended up finding, well, actually, I was offered a temporary job at an organization that I had partnered with in my job that I was laid off from. So they had a 3 month maternity or a medical leave backfill opportunity that existed that seemed like a good opportunity for me to just kind of have some security. So like about a month um, after I left, I had reached out to some contacts there, and they said, "Well, actually, we have this role as kind of a temporary volunteer manager. It's not exactly what you were doing in your last job, but it's a 3 month gig that you could take on if you wanted." And they actually ended up offering me that job if I wanted to stay, but I didn't because the person didn't come back from leave. But it was a great opportunity to just have some income and do something while I was figuring out my job search. So one thing I would encourage you to do as you're in this zone is think about what can you do to take the pressure off. Is there a short-term opportunity? Is there something else you can do on a part-time basis? Can you do consulting? Can you do something that takes the financial pressure off taking the next job that's offered to you if it's not the right thing? So I would
Mm-hmm.
really encourage you to think about, is there a way to do that to take that pressure off? And then, I started really looking for a job, and I reached out to my network. I looked on LinkedIn. I looked on my kind of organizations I'd worked with before that I had partnered with. And I found an opportunity as an HR director that was open at an organization that knew me from my last job. I was doing a lot of partnerships with it was a educational company, and I was partnered with a lot of nonprofits and other educational organizations around the Bay Area where I was living at the time. And I saw that their HR director was retiring, and I reached out to her. I had actually provided them with some kind of coaching and training in their nonprofit that they worked with. So they knew me, I had credibility with them. And I ended up applying for a lot of different jobs, but that ultimately was the one that I was offered that I was most excited about, that I moved forward with. And it was kind of a warm introduction because I already knew someone there. So that's one way, obviously, you can find opportunities is when you've already worked with the organization in some way. But then also, my next job I found through a salesperson who was prospecting me at my HR director role. She wanted to sell her services to me. She took me to lunch a couple times. We chatted. And in our conversations, ultimately, it wasn't the right fit for our organization. And so we weren't going to buy what she was selling. But in our conversation, she said, have you ever thought about consulting? Because I think you sound like the kind of person who really likes helping other people. We're looking for people with your kind of background. Have you ever thought about consulting? And I said, well, it's funny because consulting is something I've always wanted to do, but I was really afraid to go out on my own as a consultant because it just seems so scary to kind of have your own consulting company. And she said, well, we hire people full-time as consultants to work with our clients. And so it could be a good opportunity for you to learn that skill. And so she encouraged me to look at her company. I ended up interviewing with them and I got the job. And so I wasn't even looking, but I just made a contact who helped me kind of get a warm introduction to the company that I wanted to work with. And ultimately that kind of made a transition in my career into consulting. And then I had been at that company for about 5 years, and I made the decision that I was ready for a change. And I was working with a lot of clients. And so I wasn't able to go really deep with the clients I worked with. And so I just felt like I was kind of always in triage mode, like helping people solve HR problems. And I wanted to move into a place where I could do more HR strategy with the companies I worked with and partner with them more deeply. And so I looked around my area. I was living in the Seattle area by then. And I said, what's a not a consulting firm around this area that I'd want to work with? And so I found two that looked appealing, and I found the people on LinkedIn who kind of represented those companies, and I cold reached out to them on LinkedIn. And I just said, hey, this is what I do. I'm really excited about the opportunity of moving into a more local boutique firm here in the Seattle area. I'm wondering if you'd be open to having a conversation. And one of them responded, and I had to go back and forth like 4 or 5 times
Mhm.
to actually pin that person down and get a conversation with her. So it was hard, but she was open to it. She was just super busy. And, I kept following up, and we had maybe 10 connections on LinkedIn in common. So I was a warm introduction in the sense that she had credibility for me because she knew a lot of people that I knew. But I got a half hour conversation with her on a Thursday. She referred me to have a conversation with her second in command on Friday, and I got a job offer that afternoon.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
you never know, right?
Yeah.
Had a need that they hadn't even posted. They felt like it was a good opportunity, and I just put myself out there. I said, "Hey, I'm just starting to think about what I wanted to do," and I kind of manifested what I wanted. I said, "This is the kind of job I want," and it was the right fit. I knew that I was the kind of person who would do well in their organization. They saw my background and said, "Yep, this is a good fit." But I never would have even seen a job opportunity necessarily from them, um, because they post them so rarely. They hire, now that I've been there for 4 years, they hire almost entirely through referrals because people who work with them love it. They have a network of HR professionals they know. I've referred 4 or 5 people, none of whom has actually gotten an opportunity because it's a tough thing to get an opportunity with them. I just happened to be there at the right moment, have the right background, but I never would have been given that opportunity if I hadn't cold reached out on LinkedIn to this random person I'd never met before. And so I think from my experience, it's about putting yourself out there in a variety of ways. It's obviously using your network of people you know. It's being open to meeting new people, networking, going to events, making connections, because you never know who's going to be that person who says, "Oh, I actually have something that might be a good fit for you." And then it's about reaching out to people through your connections who might have opportunities or jobs that you see on posted. If you know that somebody works at a company that has a job, don't apply for that job. Apply with the person you know. They're a warm
Yeah.
introduction. Referrals always get more attention. So don't be afraid to ask for connections, to ask for people to help you. And you'll be surprised how many people are really excited to help introduce you to their company, to help make that warm introduction, especially because they usually get a referral bonus if you get hired.
Yeah. Yeah, and this has been a rich conversation up until now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got other questions that I
Mm-hmm.
want to ask you. But if we could stop the conversation right now, this would be it. Because I've heard so many times from other people that using your network and you have a conversation and it feels like a random conversation that leads to another conversation that leads to an introduction. And I just thank you for adding this data point to a
Right.
whole pool of similar data points to say that just putting yourself out there, having a conversation, using your network is the key to getting back into the workforce,
Yeah.
relatively quickly.
Sure.
Um, so given your experience of perhaps interviewing people and being around, in the human resource function in your career, what do you think helps a candidate stand out from the application process through to the interview process? You touched upon, crafting your own narrative. So, how can candidates effectively tell their own story? And in fact, what do hiring managers perhaps pay the closest attention to during the course of the interview? I think there's a bunch of questions in there, but
Sure. No, I
if you
get
could
it.
address that would be great.
Mhm. Absolutely. As I said, I'm talking from the perspective of small businesses typically. So if you're applying for a job again at a giant company, some of this might not be as relevant. But when I work with small businesses, people who do their homework do so much better in the interview process. And that's a variety of things. So I've worked with a company that designs video games for the last 2.5 years, and I've been very involved in their hiring process. Over that time, we've hired 31 people in that 2.5 years. And it's shocking how many people come in to a job interview and really don't even understand like the games that the company is making, or hasn't done the homework to understand the segment of the industry they're in. And we really care. We care to see that people have made an effort to learn about who we are as a company, what makes us unique, why they would want to work with us from a perspective of the products that we make. Because it is so core to who we are to have people who work with us be passionate about the work we do, care about us. It's not a job that is replaceable any other company. It's a job making a product that we care about in an industry that is very specific. And in our industry in particular, the identity of like who we are, what we build is important. And so I've had a candidate for a marketing job, for example, come in, and the marketing team vetoed the person because they said, I don't think this person's ever even looked at our games. And I actually tried to share the feedback with that person afterwards, just saying, hey, just FYI, one of the feedback points I received from the team was that they wished you had spent some time playing our games. And she came back and said, oh, I did. I set up an account. I played the games. But she didn't express that in her interview process. She didn't talk about the games from the perspective of someone who'd actually played them. And we wanted someone on the marketing team who was going to be selling our games to people to understand the games and to be able to have a narrative to talk about them. So that's one very specific example. But I think in most small businesses, the product is so important to the company's kind of identity. If you work for an Amazon or a Microsoft, again, I'm in Seattle, so these are our kind of behemoths here. When you work for those giant companies, everyone kind of knows what they are. But when you're in a small business and you're hiring, people will apply for jobs and barely even research what the company is because they're applying for so many jobs. So I would say, be methodical. If you get an interview with a company, take the time to really look them up, read their Glassdoor reviews if they have them, look at their website, try to look at who works for them on LinkedIn, try to do your homework and actually spend 45 minutes or an hour digging into who they are as a company, read reviews of their product, try to understand. It doesn't matter what kind of role you're in. If you come in and you can speak authentically about your understanding of the company and ask genuine questions about what you've researched, you're interested in the interviewer and you're showing that you're interested in the company, you care about it. And when you're interviewing a dozen people for a job, and many of them have very similar backgrounds, especially right now, we're getting very high quality applicants coming in for our jobs. And it's a tough job market, which I know your listeners are experiencing. There's a lot of people looking for work that have great experience. And so it's a competitive market. And so when you can differentiate yourself by showing genuine interest and excitement about the company and what they do, who they are, you stand out in the interview process. So that's one key thing. And then it's about, showing that you know what's happening in your industry. So kind of staying up to date. It's being able to talk authentically about AI. That's one of the things that in most industries is a huge learning opportunity for current teams. It's something that the companies I work with are either fully embracing. I work with an AI startup and all they do is build AI products. And so for them, they're deeply into AI and everyone who works with them is passionate about it and they talk about it. But other companies, they're trying to embrace AI. They're trying to figure out how they're going to use AI to be successful. And so when you can talk authentically about your experience using AI in industry relevant ways, you ask about how the company is embracing AI and what they're doing to make AI relevant on their teams, what kind of skills they're looking for. That can be a really important area to show interest and expertise in. Don't be afraid to talk about AI. Also, please do not leave AI cues on your resume. We've seen resumes where there's like is there anything else I can do to improve your resume for this, job application at the end of the resume? Don't do that, right? Make sure you remove all the artifacts from AI from your resume, your cover letters.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so that's always fun. but just know that using AI is not a bad thing. Don't be afraid to talk about AI because it's so relevant to what we all are doing. In HR, I use AI daily in my work. And I want to be transparent about that to the companies I work with, because they're getting more effective use of my time because I'm leveraging resources. And companies want people who are not afraid. I mean, ask them what they want, right? Don't assume like, oh, I use AI every day. And they say, oh, you're not allowed to use AI in this job. But ask them, be genuinely interested in understanding their perspective on AI, and make sure you can talk authentically about your experience using it. And so if you don't use AI right now, you're behind the curve. And don't be afraid to use AI in your job search to help you refine your cover letters and resumes, to help you prepare for job interviews. Use AI to do that research I told you to do. Ask your AI tool of choice, hey, I'm going to be interviewing for this company. Help me learn more about what they do, and have that AI do some legwork for you, link you to articles you could read, link you to information that's relevant. So that's something that is just so pervasive in the workplace conversation right now. So showing that you're on top of it, that you know what you're doing, and that you can also authentically evaluate what AI has given you, and make sure it doesn't come across as AI slop, as AI generated work that you've not put your own effort into. That combination, I think, can make you stand out in the job search process.
Yeah, AI is certainly the business game changer of our generation.
Mm-hmm.
But are there any other trends that you're seeing that people should be mindful of, or are there other skills that you would recommend job seekers to kind of lean into beyond AI?
Yeah, I think AI is kind of the key one I thought of. I guess I answered that question a little bit a little bit earlier. That was the thing that I kind of pulled out as you asked me that question in advance.
Yeah,
So I,
and
I
the
think,
answer can be no.
yeah. I mean, I think AI is really that answer. It's what people need to be really tuned into.
Yeah. So as we kind of gliding out of this conversation, and thank you so much for
Sure,
everything that you've shared
absolutely.
to date. Um, so I guess one of my last questions is there one piece of advice, and I think you've given an amazing body of advice in this conversation, but if there's one piece of advice you could give someone navigating the uncertainty of unemployment, what would it be?
I think it would be authenticity. Be who you are. If you try to be someone else in an interview process, your company is hiring somebody that is not what they're actually going to get. And to find the right next opportunity, you need to find that match between who you are authentically and a company that's going to love and appreciate who you are. So if you come into an interview process and act differently from who you want to authentically be at work, you're selling yourself as something that's different from what they're getting. And you might not have a great opportunity or great experience there if you walk into a job that you feel like you've kind of manufactured yourself for in a way that's not authentic. And so I would say, listen to all of this advice, listen to all the people, do the work, but don't let who you are be subsumed by all the work you do. People hire people. And so you want to be the kind of person that's going to be successful in the organization based on who you are. Don't manufacture a personality that you think someone wants, because ultimately you come across as inauthentic, you come across as strange. People can tell when you're trying to be something that you're not. And so the right job for you is going to be the one that embraces you for who you are. If you're a geek, find a company full of geeks who are going to embrace that geekiness. As I said, as a consultant, I walk into lots of different businesses. I typically work with about 4 or 5 businesses at a time, and they're all very different. But I try to find connection points with each of the businesses I work with and authentically show who I am in a way that makes me accessible to the team, that helps me connect. When I started working with this video game company, they do a little intro of new hires. And so I came up in front and got interviewed by the founder. And I told them that I'd watched every single episode of Star Trek. And it's true. It's something I did when I was unemployed. I started the process. I kind of fell into this streaming, thing. And it took several years, but, and obviously I had a job for part of that, but it became a passion of mine and it was really fun. And so I shared that with the team, and I couldn't believe how many people connected with me on that and had their own fandoms that they were passionate about, understood that what I was saying is, I'm like you. I'm accessible. I'm a geek too. And I have to, pivot because I code switch a lot in my different jobs, but I always try to be authentic and share the things that I'm passionate about that's going to connect with that group. So in other companies, it's my passion for cooking and how I love to make macarons. So, I choose my audience. But for me, it's finding ways to be myself and to authentically connect with the people I work with. And I will say in the hiring process, it's so obvious when someone is awkward because they're trying to be something they're not. And
Mm.
ultimately, you're going to be happier, you're going to be more successful, and you're going to get the job that's right for you if you make sure that you're yourself in this process and that you find out what makes you special. As you're talking to your network, as you're thinking about the people that you trust, ask them, what makes me great to be around? What do you like about me? What do you like about me at work? When you have friends from prior jobs, what makes me a great partner at work? Make sure you really recognize and embrace your unique kind of special sauce that makes you a great collaborator, that makes you someone who's fun to work with, and try to make sure you present that in a way that's authentic to the person that you're ultimately going to be working
That
with.
is great advice. Great advice. The last question then I have for you, which is, if people wanted to learn more about you and in your consulting practice or the organization that you work for, how can they find you?
Well, you're welcome to share, in the show notes, my
Show notes.
LinkedIn
Yeah.
profile.
Yeah.
I work with an organization called Swift HR Solutions. We're a boutique consulting firm in the Seattle area, but we actually service clients all over the country. And we provide fractional HR service. So we basically work with companies that want an HR leader who is seasoned and professional, but don't have the capacity to hire someone full time. So I act as an HR director for, as I said, about 4 or 5 companies at a time. Sometimes it's one day a week. Other times it's half day a week. Some of my startups, it's more of a monthly engagement where I spend 4 hours a month working with the leadership team. And then I'm available on email and Slack and phone to provide kind of in the moment needs. So I love what I do. I will do this until I retire. It's really found it's me finding the thing where I feel like I can provide the most value, but also that organizations get what they need on an HR perspective. I love being authentic, genuine HR for small businesses. Helping employees feel like they have someone on their side who's there to work for them, but also executives have someone to help them with strategy. And for me, this has been such a great kind of development opportunity in my career to get to this point where I could do what I really love. And I wouldn't have been on this path if I hadn't gotten laid off back in 2011. And so, I think catalysts like that can be just an opportunity to move you along the path toward where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to end this particular episode, in that for people to find their spot in the world and their spot in the world that they love in the same way that you found it. If they listen and put into practice everything that you've shared in this particular episode, they will find that for themselves. So, Becky, I can't thank you enough for your willingness to come on and talk to me and share everything that you've shared. And I certainly feel like anybody that listens to this will get a ton out of it. So thanks
Great.
for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye.